Welcome to a custom-tailored deep dive. Today we are unpacking a massive March 2026 intelligence report.
Yeah, it is a big one.
It really is. And our mission today is detailing the Republican Party's structural and electoral strategy heading right into the midterms.
Right, and before we really get into the weeds here, let's just establish our ground rules.
Always important.
Exactly. We are looking at this strictly as an analytical exercise. We're neutrally examining the data and the tactics from these sources without endorsing any partisan viewpoints at all.
Yeah, we're simply exploring how a governing party tries to survive the historical midterm penalty.
Right, that dreaded 6-year itch where voter fatigue sets in.
Yep.
The honeymoon is long over, and voters are usually ready to change the locks.
So to understand how they plan to survive that penalty, we first have to look at the battlefield, starting with the Senate.
Right.
Even with high-profile retirements, like Mitch McConnell stepping down and being replaced by John Thune, the structural map just naturally leans in the GOP's favor this cycle.
It does. Which actually means the most intense battles aren't necessarily against the Democrats in those safe states.
They're happening inside the House.
Exactly. The Texas primary is a perfect example of this. You have a deeply entrenched traditional institutionalist like Senator John Cornyn,
Right.
who was actually forced into a runoff against Ken Paxton, who represents the Medjie-Air populist wing.
Wow.
It really lays bare the friction between the party's old guard and its new base.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that internal friction makes a lot of sense. But how does that play out in the House of Representatives?
Oh.
Because the math there is completely different. Right now, Democrats have a 5-point lead in generic polling.
Right.
Meaning you, the voters, currently prefer a nameless Democrat over a nameless Republican. Yet the sources say the GOP is aggressively building structural firewalls to hold their razor-thin majority. What does that actually look like?
It looks like using the judiciary and aggressive redistricting as defensive shields. Take New York, for instance. A lower court wanted to redraw boundaries to better represent minority voters, but the conservative Supreme Court intervened and paused it.
Interesting.
Yeah, that stay effectively protected a highly vulnerable GOP seat in Staten Island, but it is a double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, relying on the courts might save a seat today, but it could easily backfire by energizing Democratic turnout in November.
That makes sense. So the maps are one defensive layer. But I was genuinely surprised by their strategy to win over working-class voters.
The affordability tour.
Yes, the report highlights this affordability tour. What exactly is this pivot toward pocketbook populism?
Basically, it's an executive branch strategy focused entirely on immediate, tangible financial relief for voters.
Like what?
We're talking about direct military bonuses, major housing reform, and even an executive push to reschedule cannabis.
Wow.
The goal is to aggressively neutralize classic Democratic wedge issues. If you can address the immediate financial anxieties of the working class, you bypass traditional partisan divides completely.
That is a significant pivot.
Yeah.
But to pull off something that coordinated across the whole country, you'd need the entire party apparatus moving in lockstep.
Right, exactly. Which brings us to the Republican National Committee. The executive branch essentially executed a corporate takeover of the RNC.
Right.
They brought in Joe Grutters to run it, specifically to guarantee absolute ideological loyalty. It ensures that every dollar of centralized funding serves the executive's midterm strategy. No rogue messaging allowed.
But our sources show there are major limits to that top-down control. Look at the Indiana Rebellion.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
In a deep red state, the GOP supermajority actually voted down a congressional map that was backed directly by the president.
Right.
They chose to protect their own local boundaries and constituents rather than bow to national strategy.
And the blowback was immediate. A national PAC called No Quarter launched severe retaliation.
Wow.
For those local Indiana leaders, defying the president means facing well-funded primary challengers and having their national financial support totally severed.
That is intense.
It perfectly illustrates the core tension defining this cycle for you, the listener. It's the clash between a centralized populist executive demanding absolute loyalty and local institutionalists prioritizing their own political survival.
Which leaves you with an interesting question to mull over.
Yeah.
Our sources show that hyper-local, grassroots officials, the county sheriffs, the township boards, the local assessors, they are the true, enduring bedrock of any political party's power.
Exactly.
So what happens to the two-party system if those local administrators eventually just refuse to recognize the authority of their own national leadership?
Right.
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.